What if your doctor told you that you only had 30 days left to live, because your body was silently breaking down from the inside? That question wasn't just a dramatic hypothetical. For Frank Miller, 68 years old and alone in a quiet suburb of Austin, Texas, it felt dangerously real. Frank wasn't always like this. Decades ago, he was one of NASA's most promising engineers. He helped design parts of the International Space Station. He once had a wife he loved more than life itself, and a daughter who used to dance on his feet in the kitchen. But now, Frank was retired, semi-forgotten, and stubbornly clinging to frozen dinners and black coffee. Exercise was walking to the mailbox. His favorite hobby was scrolling through YouTube videos of Elon Musk and wondering how the hell a man in his 50s had the energy of a college athlete. Frank had always admired Musk, not just the rockets or the cars, but the mindset. "That guy doesn't sleep," Frank would mumble to himself, chewing on a microwaved burrito. "What's he running on, jet fuel?" Then came the pain. It started small, like a tight band across his chest. At first, Frank brushed it off. Just heartburn, he told himself, ignoring the warning signs. Until one morning, mid-walk around the block, the pain surged like a lightning bolt. His legs gave out. His vision blurred. And he hit the concrete with a thud that echoed down the quiet street. Neighbors called 911. He woke up in a hospital bed, tubes in his arm, blinking under the harsh fluorescent light. "Mr. Miller," the doctor began, flipping through a chart. "Your body's under severe metabolic stress. High blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, signs of early heart failure. If you don't make drastic changes, you could be looking at 30 days. Maybe less." Frank laughed, dry and bitter. "You're joking." The doctor didn't smile. Frank stared at the ceiling that night, wide awake. Machines beeped softly beside him. His body felt like an old machine, worn gears, rusted joints, low battery warning flashing. He whispered to no one, "So this is how I go out. Not with a bang. Not with rockets or brilliance. But in a damn hospital bed, alone." The silence answered him. A few days later, discharged and back home, Frank did something unusual. He turned on YouTube, but not for distractions. He wanted answers. That's when he stumbled upon a podcast featuring Elon Musk being interviewed about health, discipline, and aging. "I work 80 to 100 hours a week," Musk said casually, sipping sparkling water. "But I've learned if I don't take care of my body, my mind doesn't function. What you eat, how you rest, it all matters. You can't build Mars if you're falling apart on Earth." That line hit Frank like a defibrillator to the soul. You can't build Mars if you're falling apart on Earth. He paused the video. Rewound. Played it again. His whole life, he'd treated his body like an afterthought, a necessary container to carry his brain from one project to another. Now it was catching up with him. He pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Things I can change before I die. 1. Diet. 2. Exercise. 3. Make peace with Emily. 4. Ask for help, yeah, even this. That same night, Frank did something even more surprising. He called someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Dr. Rachel Yoon. She picked up after 2 rings. "Frank," she said, her voice familiar and warm. "Is that really you?" "Yeah. It's me," Frank replied, voice cracking. "I think I'm dying, Rachel. And I need your help." She didn't laugh. Didn't scold. Just listened. They talked for hours, about life, regrets, the past. Rachel had gone on to become a respected nutrition scientist, working with some of the top minds in longevity science, even consulting for tech billionaires interested in living past 100. "Frank," she said, "there are 3 foods, 3 incredibly powerful foods, that could literally begin to reverse your condition. But you've got to commit. Like you're building a rocket, not making a salad." Frank chuckled. 3 foods, huh? That's all? No, she replied. That's just where we start. The next morning, Frank stood in the produce section of his local grocery store, holding a bright red beet in one hand and a can of sardines in the other. What the hell am I doing? He muttered. He added blueberries, fresh and plump, to the cart. The 3 foods Rachel had sworn by: beets, sardines, blueberries. The 3 musketeers, she called them. Natural fuel for the aging body. He also bought a notebook. That night, Frank sat at his kitchen table, flipping open his new notebook. On the first page, he wrote. Day 1, rebuilding a rocket named Frank. He took a bite of roasted beets. They were earthy. A little sweet. Not terrible. Then came the sardines. God, he gagged. Who eats this on purpose? But he finished them. And the blueberries? They reminded him of the pies his wife used to bake every summer. Just the smell made him tear up. He wrote again. I'm not doing this to live forever. I'm doing this because I finally want to live right. Before bed, Frank opened his laptop and hit record. His first vlog. Hi. My name's Frank Miller. I'm 68 years old. I've been an idiot about my health, and it's finally caught up to me. But I'm not ready to die, not yet. He looked straight into the camera. If you're watching this and you're over 60, let me ask you, what would you do if you had 30 days to live? What would you change, today? He paused, took a breath, and added. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? If you walked into Frank Miller's home, you'd never guess a brilliant mind once lived there. The living room was clean, sure, but sterile. The kind of place that looked more like a hotel than a home. A worn recliner. A muted flat-screen TV. A bookcase lined with dusty engineering textbooks and untouched photo albums. No plants, no music, no laughter. And upstairs. A door that hadn't been opened in 3 years. Emily's room. Frank hadn't stepped inside since the funeral. It was easier to pretend the past wasn't waiting behind it like a punch in the chest. He married young. His wife, Caroline, had been his high school sweetheart. She was all art and warmth, the kind of woman who smiled at strangers and painted her emotions when she couldn't find the words. He was logic. Precision. He'd build a life with blueprints if he could. They balanced each other for years. She taught him how to enjoy silence. He taught her how to fix the kitchen sink without calling for help. They built a home, had a daughter, chased the American dream the way people used to believe it still worked. Frank climbed the ranks at NASA. Late nights, early flights, deadlines that could mean the difference between spaceflight and catastrophe. Caroline stayed home with Emily. I'll make it up to you, Frank would always say. I know you will, Caroline would always answer. But time kept slipping. He missed Emily's first piano recital. Missed their anniversary 3 years in a row. Missed the call when Caroline first felt the chest pains. By the time he took it seriously, the cancer had already spread. Frank never forgave himself. Not really. After Caroline passed, he tried to be a good father, but guilt makes a poor foundation. Emily was 16, full of rage and grief, and Frank didn't know how to talk without sounding like a manual. They argued constantly. About college. About friends. About everything. She said he was cold. He said she was ungrateful. They both said things they never took back. The last conversation before she left for New York was short. I can't be here anymore, Emily said through clenched teeth. Frank just nodded. Then don't be. And just like that, his whole world left in a cab with 2 suitcases. Now, Sitting at the kitchen table with a half-eaten plate of roasted beets, Frank stared at an old photo of Caroline and Emily at the beach. They looked so alive. He felt like a museum piece. He picked up his phone, scrolled through contacts, and stopped on her name. Emily Miller. Should he call? He hesitated. He always hesitated. There had been birthdays he skipped calling. Holidays with unanswered texts. Every year that passed made the silence heavier. Frank put the phone down. Not yet. He needed to be better first. Stronger. He needed a reason to reach out. Later that day, Frank opened a box from Amazon. Inside, a blood pressure monitor, a digital scale, a notebook labeled Health Tracker. He wasn't just changing his diet. He was turning his life into a project. It was the only way he knew how to face something big, track it, measure it, solve it. He took his blood pressure, high. Weight, too high. Resting heart rate, embarrassing. Perfect, he muttered. Now I know where the rocket's taking off from. He scribbled down the numbers and titled the page, Mission, Rebuild. Day 2. That evening, he recorded another vlog. Alright, day 2, he said, holding a can of sardines like it was a hand grenade. Tried sardines again. I'd rather lick a car battery, but I got through it. He laughed at his own joke. No one else was watching yet. But he didn't care. This wasn't for fame. It was for accountability. He added. I was thinking about my wife today. Caroline. She used to say I was like a robot who forgot how to feel things unless something exploded. Funny, huh? A pause. Anyway, if you're watching this and you've ever lost someone, I get it. That kind of pain. It doesn't fade. But maybe, just maybe, it can push us towards something better. Late that night, Frank finally did it. He walked up the stairs. Paused in front of Emily's old room. His hand trembled as he turned the knob. Inside, everything was frozen in time. Posters of indie bands. Shelves full of books. A dusty Polaroid camera on the desk. Frank picked up a photo from the nightstand. Caroline and Emily in matching blue dresses, holding hands at a garden party. He had taken that picture. Caroline had forced him to come. And for once, he had listened. He sank into the bed and whispered into the darkness, I'm sorry. For all of it. Then he stood up, closed the door, and made a promise. I'll earn a second chance, even if I have to fight every cell in my body for it. The next morning, Frank called Rachel again. All right, he said. I'm ready. What's next? Her voice was calm but firm. Now we talk about why those 3 foods matter. Not just for your heart, but for your brain, your energy, your longevity. But first, we're going to test your willpower. Frank chuckled. Trust me. NASA had nothing on my stubborn streak. Rachel paused. I'm sending you a challenge, Frank. A 30-day tracker. If you make it through, I'll introduce you to the deeper science. And maybe even the biohacker crowd, people like you. Only, less cranky. He smiled. For the first time in years, maybe. Bring it on. Outside, the Texas sun was starting to rise. Birds chirped in the distance. Frank stepped onto his porch with a cup of green tea, Rachel's suggestion, and took a slow breath. No more frozen burritos. No more guilt on repeat. This was his reset. Frank had never been one for signs. He was a man of math and metal, someone who trusted data, not destiny. But what happened 3 days into his new routine felt like something, or someone, was trying to shake him awake. It was 6:15 a.m. And Frank was at the park. Walking, not running, his knees wouldn't dare, but it was something. The sun hadn't fully crested yet, and the trail was quiet, save for the occasional jogger passing by in neon shoes and AirPods. Frank wore New Balance sneakers from 2007, a faded NASA cap, and clutched a plastic water bottle like a lifeline. His pace wasn't impressive, but his determination was. Left foot, right foot. Don't die, he muttered. Mid-loop, Frank slowed near a bench and pulled out his phone to check his step count. That's when a notification popped up from YouTube. Live, Elon Musk talks diet, health, and the future of human longevity. He stopped walking. A live interview? Right now. With sweat trickling down his brow, Frank sat on the bench, popped in some cheap earbuds, and hit watch. The screen lit up, Elon in a black t-shirt, seated casually across from a host in a crisp blazer. They were in some glassy studio overlooking downtown Austin. It felt weird knowing Musk was probably less than 10 miles from him. The host leaned forward. So Elon, there's been a lot of speculation about your energy levels. You're running Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, X. How do you keep going? Musk smirked slightly. Sleep helps. But honestly, nutrition is the foundation. I didn't always take it seriously. When I was younger, I could run on caffeine and chaos. Now, if I don't eat clean, I crash. Simple as that. Frank leaned in. What's your go-to food? The host asked. Elon answered without hesitation. 3 things. Beets. Sardines. Blueberries. Every day. No joke. They're rocket fuel for the human body. Frank blinked. You've got to treat your body like it's a system, like a spacecraft, Elon continued. Garbage in, garbage out. And if you want to go the distance, you fuel it right. Frank's heart sped up, not from exertion, but recognition. Beets. Sardines. Blueberries. The exact same 3 foods Rachel had told him about. He'd thought it was some odd naturopath thing, or a quirky diet. But Elon Musk? The guy planning to colonize Mars? Frank stood up slowly, eyes still glued to the phone screen. This wasn't just a wake-up call. It was confirmation. Back at home, Frank was buzzing with a strange, unfamiliar energy. He opened his fridge and stared at his modest collection, neatly packed containers of beets, a tray of fresh blueberries, and a row of sardine tins. No soda. No chips. No frozen meals with sodium counts that read like lottery numbers. He poured himself a glass of water, grabbed his journal, and wrote. Day 3, the Musk confirmation. Elon said what Rachel said. And if both of them are saying the same thing, maybe there's more here than I thought. Maybe this isn't just about living longer. Maybe it's about living better, on purpose. That evening, Frank rewatched the interview and jotted down quotes like a student cramming for finals. Then he recorded a new vlog. Alright folks, he began, adjusting the camera. Day 3. I was gonna talk about how I almost threw up eating sardines again, but something happened today that's bigger than a can of stinky fish. He held up his phone to show a paused frame of Elon's face. This guy right here. Yeah, the Elon Musk. He just confirmed everything I've been doing. The beets, the sardines, the blueberries. They're not just health foods. They're part of a bigger picture. And I think I'm starting to see it. He paused, looked into the lens. I know most of you watching this are like me, retired, creaky joints, wondering if it's too late to turn things around. I'm here to tell you, it's not. If the guy building starships says this stuff works, hell, I'm all in. So tell me in the comments, what's the one food you'd never want to give up, no matter what? I'll tell you mine, blueberry pie. Haven't earned it back yet, but I will. That night, Frank allowed himself to imagine a future, something he hadn't done in years. Not just surviving, but thriving. He thought about going to New York. Seeing Emily. Watching her eyes widen when he walked through the door looking like he had years ago. Lighter, sharper, alive. He didn't know how she'd respond. But he was going to earn the right to find out. The next morning, Frank got an email from Rachel. Subject: You ready for food number 1 breakdown? Body: Let's talk beets. Real talk. Beets boost nitric oxide, which expands blood vessels. That means better circulation, lower blood pressure, more oxygen to your brain. There's a reason athletes use beet juice before marathons. And guess what? Old people need it more. Why? Because our vessels stiffen. Our hearts pump harder. Beets reverse that. Naturally. Get ready. Week 2 will hit harder. Don't quit. Frank smiled. Bring it on. Later, while prepping dinner, Frank remembered something Elon had said during the live stream. The body is the most advanced machine we have. It's just no one teaches us how to maintain it. Frank looked at the can opener in his hand, the sardines on the counter, and said to himself, time to read the manual. Frank had always believed the phrase, "You are what you eat," was a throwaway cliché. Until now. Because every morning he woke up just a bit sharper, breathed a little easier, and moved with a little more purpose. Something was changing, and he knew it wasn't just the walks or the journaling. It was the food. Beets. Sardines. Blueberries. They sounded more like a weird salad from a hipster restaurant than a life-saving protocol, but Rachel was insistent. And now, with Elon backing it up, Frank was all in. Still, he didn't really understand why these specific foods mattered so much. So when Rachel invited him to a private Zoom call with a small group of longevity researchers she advised, Frank agreed, even if he was terrified of saying something dumb in front of people who used words like mitochondrial optimization in casual conversation. There were 5 faces on the screen when he logged in. Dr. Rachel Yoon, of course. Dr. Felix Grant, a bionutritionist from Stanford. Avery Chen, a sleep and recovery expert. Lisa Torrey, a cardiologist working with NFL retirees. And one person who caught Frank completely off guard. Kyle, a wiry 28-year-old who used to be an engineer at SpaceX. Kyle grinned. You must be Frank. Rachel's told us you're the next great comeback story. Frank chuckled. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm just trying to stay upright. Rachel jumped in. Frank's on day 4 of the protocol. I figured it was time we gave him the full download, why these 3 foods are the foundation. No more mystery. Let's start with the beets, said Felix, adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses. You've probably noticed your energy's improved. That's because beets are one of the richest natural sources of dietary nitrates, which convert into nitric oxide in the body. It's like turning your blood vessels into flexible hoses instead of stiff pipes. Better blood flow, Rachel added. Especially to the brain. Kyle leaned in. When I was at SpaceX, I started drinking beet juice before testing high-G simulations. Noticed I didn't get lightheaded anymore. Frank raised an eyebrow. So, beet juice is basically rocket fuel for your veins. Exactly, said Lisa, laughing. Next came sardines. Now this one, Frank still had trouble with. He ate them. But like a man serving a sentence. Look, said Lisa, I get it. They're not sexy. But sardines are pound for pound one of the best sources of omega-3 fatty acids, protein, calcium, vitamin D, and coenzyme Q10. Coenzyme what? Frank asked. CoQ10, Rachel said. Your cells use it to generate energy. Especially heart cells. Kyle added, Elon's personal trainer told me they have him eating sardines daily. He calls it his anti-inflammation bomb. Sardines reduce joint pain, protect your heart, and they're one of the only fish low in mercury. Felix nodded. And because they're small, oily fish, they deliver brain support and cardiovascular protection in one punch. Perfect for aging bodies. Frank was silent for a second, then said, "Still tastes like cat food." Everyone laughed. Then came blueberries. "I like this one," Frank said. "No complaints." "You shouldn't," Avery chimed in. "They're brain food. Rich in anthocyanins, those deep purple pigments that act like neuroprotective ninjas. They reduce oxidative stress, improve memory, and even help regulate blood sugar." Rachel added, "There's a Harvard study showing people who eat blueberries regularly reduce their risk of cognitive decline by up to 35%. That's not a small number." Frank scribbled that down in his journal. "Beets for blood. Sardines for heart. Blueberries for brain," he muttered. "That's a damn good trio." "It's just the beginning," Rachel said. "But they build the foundation. Without circulation, your cells starve. Without fat-soluble nutrients, your body burns out. Without antioxidants, your brain rusts." Frank paused, nodding slowly. Then he looked into the camera and said, "You know, I used to build machines that could survive deep space. But I never learned how to build a body that could survive retirement." Everyone went quiet. Rachel smiled. "You're building it now." That night, Frank cooked. Like really cooked, for the first time in probably a decade. A beet and arugula salad. Sardines with lemon and fresh dill. A blueberry chia pudding for dessert. He sat at the kitchen table, classical music playing softly in the background, and ate every bite like it was medicine from the future. After dinner, he opened his notebook and wrote. Day 4, the why behind the what. I get it now. The foods aren't random. They're tactical. They target the systems breaking down in my body. Blood flow. Inflammation. Brain health. I'm not just eating to survive. I'm eating to function. Elon's not trying to live forever. He's trying to stay sharp enough to do the impossible. Maybe I'm not building rockets anymore, but maybe I can build something else. Maybe I can rebuild me. Frank's vlog that night was more serious. Today I learned why the foods matter. I mean really matter. Not just for my heart, but for the way I think. The way I feel. And yeah, even the way I show up for the people I've let down. He held up a blueberry. This little thing might just save my brain. He paused. Looked at the camera. If you're out there and you felt tired for years, like fog has crept in and made itself at home, I'm telling you, start with these 3. Just these 3. Do it for a week. You don't need to be Elon Musk to live like you've still got rockets to launch. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment. What's one thing you've given up on, that maybe you still have time to fix? Frank went to bed that night with his window cracked open, a cool breeze drifting in. His joints still ached a little. His belly wasn't flat. But something in his mind, his spirit, was finally starting to move again. For the first time in a long time, he felt hope. By day 6, Frank was flying high. Well, walking slightly faster, sleeping better, and waking up without the weight of dread pressing on his chest like it used to. He'd eaten his way through 6 cans of sardines, his taste buds still objected, roasted enough beets to turn his fingertips pink, and become strangely excited about blueberry sales at the grocery store. He was down 3 pounds. His blood pressure had ticked downward. And best of all, he felt like he was finally doing something that mattered. Until he got the call. It was 9:43 a.m. Frank had just finished journaling and was putting on his sneakers for a walk when the phone buzzed. Emily Miller, mobile. His heart stopped. He stared at the name like it might vanish. He hadn't called her yet, not because he didn't want to, but because he was still convincing himself he was worth hearing from. Now, she was calling him. He answered on the 3rd ring, trying to steady his voice. Hey. Emily. Silence. Then a breath. Hi, Dad. It had been 3 years since he'd heard her voice. 3 years since she'd yelled, "You care more about systems than people," and slammed the door. 3 years since he'd told her, "You'll understand when you're older," and watched her cab disappear. And yet, here she was. "I saw your video," she said quietly. "The YouTube one." Frank froze. "You did?" "I've been watching since day one. Someone shared it in a group I'm in. I didn't realize it was you at first. You look different." Frank blinked, overwhelmed. "I don't even know what to say," he finally managed. "Say it's not too late," she said, her voice cracking. Frank sat down, hand gripping the arm of the recliner. "It's not. I swear to God, it's not too late." They talked for 17 minutes. It was clumsy. Awkward. Emotional. But they laughed twice. And before they hung up, Emily said 7 words Frank never thought he'd hear. "Let's talk again. Maybe, even visit." He almost dropped the phone. For the rest of the day, Frank floated. Until dinner. He'd gone to a small diner he used to avoid. It wasn't part of the plan, but he was feeling good, too good. He figured he could treat himself. Just one burger. Maybe a soda. It's not like one cheat meal would undo everything, right? It tasted like heaven. Greasy, melty, warm comfort. Every bite hit like a memory. Fries crisp and salty. A thick milkshake that reminded him of dates with Caroline when they were broke and 22. He devoured the whole thing. Then drove home in silence. At 2 a.m., he woke up with his heart racing and a headache pounding behind his eyes. His stomach churned like he'd swallowed a rock. The guilt hit harder than the food. What the hell was he thinking? The next morning, he checked his vitals. Blood pressure spiked. Weight up 2 pounds. Joints stiff again. 1 meal. That's all it took. He sat at the table, ashamed, sipping water like it was penance. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. "Saw you skipped logging last night. Everything okay?" Frank sighed. Typed back. "Cheated. Burger, fries, milkshake. Feeling it. Not proud." Rachel's reply came fast. "This isn't about perfection. It's about direction. Get back on track. No guilt. Just data. You're not a failure, you're a person." Frank read it twice. Then again. No guilt. Just data. That afternoon, he recorded a raw vlog. "Okay, full honesty. I screwed up last night," he said, eyes tired. "I got cocky. Thought I earned a break. That break set me back 48 hours. He looked down, then up again. "If you're watching this thinking, it's too hard, you're right. It is hard. But slipping doesn't mean quitting. It means you're still in the game. Hit subscribe, hit reset, and tell me, when you mess up, what pulls you back." Later, he opened his notebook and wrote. Day 6, the fall. "One meal knocked me down harder than I expected. But I'm learning that setbacks are part of momentum. Not the end. Just turbulence. Even rockets shake when they break through the atmosphere. Doesn't mean they're crashing." That evening, Frank boiled a fresh batch of beets. Opened another sardine tin. Ate every single blueberry in the container. He wasn't punishing himself, he was recommitting. Because this wasn't about 6 perfect days. It was about forever starting over, on purpose. Frank sat in front of his computer, eyes narrowed, headphones on. He wasn't watching cat videos or late-night stand-up this time, he was on his 3rd rewatch of Elon Musk's diet interview. Not because of what Elon said, but because of what he didn't. He noticed it the second time through. Subtle. Barely perceptible. A slight hesitation when the interviewer asked about discipline. A flicker of emotion when Elon talked about balancing his workload and health. And then something strange. Elon turned away from the camera, just for a second. But Frank caught it. A shadow. The truth hit Frank like a bolt. Even Elon Musk had limits. Even the man with billion-dollar rockets and a brain like a quantum processor wasn't immune to the daily tug-of-war between optimization and exhaustion. And if Elon wasn't perfect, if he too struggled, then maybe Frank didn't have to pretend anymore either. Maybe struggling was part of the process. Later that morning, Rachel called. "You're up early," she said. "I couldn't sleep," Frank admitted. "I keep thinking about what we don't see. All the parts Elon didn't say out loud. The cost of chasing performance like that." Rachel nodded slowly. "There's always a cost. He talks about sardines and space travel. But he doesn't talk about loneliness. About what happens when your body outpaces your heart." "You're starting to understand," she said softly. Frank looked down. "I don't want to end up a machine." Rachel smiled gently. "Good. Because you're not." They shifted the conversation toward food. Frank had been on the protocol for nearly a full week, and the effects were becoming visible: lower inflammation, better energy, even deeper sleep. But Rachel warned him not to get complacent. "This isn't a one-week miracle. It's a shift," she said. "You can't hack health in 7 days." Frank chuckled. "Even with blueberries?" "Even with blueberries," she laughed. After the call, Frank opened his notebook. He flipped back to day 1. The handwriting was stiff, hesitant. Now, his lines were firmer. More confident. He wrote. Day 7, the missing chapter. "I realized something today: every success story skips the part about the struggle. They show the before. They show the after. But the in-between. That's where the blood and guts live. What Elon didn't say. That sometimes your greatest achievement can't hold your hand. That discipline doesn't stop your bones from aching at 2 a.m. He's not a robot. And neither am I. And maybe that's the best news of all." Frank took a walk that evening. The air was brisk, sky tinged with orange and lavender. He passed by couples, kids on bikes, the same old dog walkers with their tangled leashes and polite nods. He didn't feel invisible anymore. At a bench near the pond, Frank sat with his thermos of beet tea and popped open a book Rachel had recommended, Lifespan, by Dr. David Sinclair. The opening line grabbed him. "Aging is a disease, and that means it can be treated." Frank read for 40 minutes without checking his phone once. That hadn't happened in years. When he got home, he turned on the camera. "Hey," he said. "It's day 7. 1 week in." He looked more relaxed now, like the strain around his eyes had loosened. "You know what they don't tell you? That even if you eat the right stuff, walk every morning, track your sleep, sometimes you still feel broken." He paused. Deep breath. "But here's the thing, you're not broken. You're just rebuilding. And rebuilding takes time. Pain. Patience." He leaned forward. "Don't chase perfect. Chase possible. Elon Musk didn't become Elon Musk overnight. And you don't become healthy overnight. But you can become better, every day you show up." Hit subscribe. And drop this in the comments: what's something you wish more people were honest about? That night, Frank dreamt of Caroline. She was painting in the garage, the way she used to when Emily was a baby. Music playing low. The scent of oil paints and rain in the air. She turned, smiled at him. "You're late," she said, not unkindly. "I'm catching up," he replied. She nodded once. "Good. But don't stop now. He woke up with a jolt, but smiling. The next morning, Frank stood in front of the mirror. For the first time in a while, he didn't just look at himself, he saw something. Not youth. Not perfection. But purpose. His shoulders were straighter. His eyes clearer. His belly a bit flatter. His posture no longer apologetic. He opened his fridge. Grabbed the blueberries. Ate them slowly. Then he whispered to himself. I'm not chasing Elon Musk. I'm chasing the man I promised to become. Frank didn't plan to clean the garage that day. It started with a fallen rake he tripped over. Then he noticed the cobwebs. Then the half-open cardboard boxes Caroline had labeled a decade ago in her gentle, looping cursive. He stood in the middle of the dusty space, hands on hips, breathing in the sharp scent of old wood and motor oil. The garage had always been her domain, a place where she painted, fixed broken lamps, or simply got away from the noise of the world. Frank used to say it was cluttered. She used to say it was alive. He cleared a few shelves. Opened a bin marked craft stuff. Beneath a stack of dried paintbrushes and unopened watercolors, something caught his eye. A manila envelope, sealed. On the front, written in blue ink, Frank, for someday. His breath caught in his throat. He stared at it, heart pounding. For someday. That day, apparently, was today. He brought it inside like it was a sacred artifact. Set it gently on the kitchen table. Poured a glass of water. Sat down. And opened it. Inside was a letter, 3 full pages, and a single photograph, their wedding day. Caroline's eyes sparkled like mischief wrapped in sunlight. Frank read the letter in silence, eyes moving slowly over every word. If you're reading this, I'm guessing the silence in the house finally got too loud. Or maybe you started listening to the part of yourself you've been running from. First off, I love you. Always did. Even when you shut down. Even when your mind flew off to some problem in the stars while I was standing right here, waiting. You were never unkind. Just, unavailable. And I know you didn't mean to be. You thought keeping the lights on, solving technical puzzles, making the machines hum, that was love. But what I needed wasn't a hero. It was a partner. Still, I forgave you a long time ago. Because I saw the man underneath. The one who held Emily's hand when she got stitches. The one who stayed up all night soldering a science fair project. The one who used to sing Elvis in the kitchen before the world made him serious. I hope you find your way back to him. And Frank, take care of that beautiful, brilliant body of yours. Don't treat it like a robot. Don't treat it like a punishment. Use it. Love. Caroline. Frank didn't cry often. He'd cried at Caroline's funeral, quietly, holding Emily's hand. He cried now, harder. The kind of cry that comes from somewhere deeper than your bones. The kind that scrapes grief loose from places you didn't know it was hiding. And when it was done, when the sobs quieted into sniffles, he folded the letter carefully and held the photo to his chest. Later that night, he recorded a vlog, but he didn't hit upload. It was just for him. Caroline left me a letter, he whispered. And I think it's the most important thing I've ever read. He held up the envelope. She saw me. Even when I didn't. He tapped his chest. This is why I'm doing it. Not just to live longer. But to live like someone who deserves the people who loved him. If you're out there and you've lost someone, I hope you know they never really leave. Sometimes they wait for you, in an old letter, in a dream, in the echo of their favorite song. The next morning, Frank felt different. Not lighter, deeper. Grounded. He opened his fridge, took out the 3 foods, and lined them up. Beets. Sardines. Blueberries. Fuel. Forgiveness. Focus. He scribbled a new journal entry. Day 8, the letter. I'm not healing for attention. I'm healing for her. This body. It carried me through every year of her love. And now, I'm going to treat it like a gift, not a machine. She asked me to come back to myself. I'm listening now. He took a long walk that afternoon, down a path he and Caroline used to take when Emily was still small. There was an oak tree near the halfway point. Still standing. Still reaching. Frank paused beside it and rested a hand on the trunk. Thank you, he whispered. Back home, he finally hit upload. The title of the vlog. She wrote me a letter. Everything's different now. He didn't care how many views it got. Because this time, it wasn't for the algorithm. It was for redemption. And maybe, finally, for peace. By day 10, Frank hit what Rachel called the food wall. It wasn't dramatic. He didn't throw a tantrum or binge donuts in a gas station parking lot. It was quieter than that. He just stared at the plate. A salad topped with beets. Sardines flaked with lemon and dill. Blueberries on the side. The same 3 foods. He wasn't angry. Or sad. Or even hungry. He was just tired of it. He poked at the beets with his fork, then stood and paced the kitchen. The fridge was filled with good intentions, prepped meals, cut up fruit, labeled Tupperware, but tonight, he didn't care. Not because he didn't believe anymore. But because he was sick of discipline. And sick of being the guy who's trying. Later that night, he slumped into his recliner with a bowl of dry cereal and a spoon. It was the only thing that didn't feel like a lecture on a plate. He watched TV on mute. And for the first time since starting the protocol, he didn't write in his journal. Didn't record a vlog. Didn't even open YouTube. He just sat. The next morning, Rachel texted. Day 10 is often where people hit the wall. You there? Frank stared at the message. Then slowly typed. Yup. Hard. Feels like the food's a chore. Like I'm just shoveling hope into my mouth. She responded instantly. Good. That means your why needs to get louder. When motivation dies, identity takes over. Ask yourself, who are you now? Frank didn't reply. He didn't know the answer. So instead, he took a walk. He wandered off his usual route, deeper into a wooded path he hadn't visited in years. The trees filtered light like stained glass, and the air smelled like damp leaves and pine sap. Halfway through, he saw a boy, maybe 11 or 12, riding a rusted mountain bike up a steep incline, struggling. Frank stopped and watched. The kid kept pedaling. Stumbling. Slipping. But not quitting. When he finally reached the top, he grinned wide, breathless, looked back, and saw Frank. They locked eyes. The boy gave a small wave, then rode off. That moment stuck with Frank all the way home. Back at the house, he opened his notebook for the first time in 2 days. Day 10, the wall. Today I didn't want to try. And maybe that's the most important day yet. Because it's not about loving every bite. Or feeling fired up every morning. It's about not stopping. That kid on the bike. He didn't stop either. Even when it sucked. He went back to the kitchen. Looked at the same 3 foods, and this time, didn't see boredom. He saw fuel. He saw Caroline's letter. He saw Emily's call. He saw that kid on the hill. He saw who he was becoming. That night, Frank recorded again. Day 10, he said plainly. I hated the food today. Hated the whole routine. He smiled faintly. But I didn't quit. He held up a spoonful of blueberries. This stuff isn't sexy. It's not inspiring. Sometimes it's just work. But you know what? He leaned closer. You don't have to like the food. You just have to like what it does to you. Discipline is the muscle that keeps going when motivation shuts up. He slept hard that night. Woke up clearer. Not because the food was different, but because he was. The wall wasn't the end. It was the test. And Frank had passed it. It had been months since Frank had seen Emily. Her last visit was quick, a holiday break that felt more like a passing moment than a reunion. College life had consumed her. Her classes. Her friends. Her future. She was on the fast track to something bigger, something out there in the world that Frank wasn't quite sure he understood yet. But today, she was coming back. And Frank, well, he wasn't sure what to expect. He hadn't told her about the food protocol. The fitness challenge. The health goals. He wasn't sure if she'd laugh or worry. Maybe a little of both. But today, she was coming back. The sound of a car in the driveway pulled Frank out of his thoughts. He rushed to the window and saw Emily's old sedan, still dented from that time she hit the mailbox during high school, rolling slowly up the gravel. His heart skipped. He hadn't even realized how much he'd missed her voice. When Emily stepped out of the car, she was different. Older, sure. But also, lighter. There was something about her presence that felt more grounded, more herself than it had when she left. Her smile was wide, her eyes bright with excitement, and her steps more confident than Frank had remembered. "Dad!" she called, running up the porch steps to wrap him in a tight hug. "I can't believe you're here," Frank said, holding her tight. The weight of months apart seemed to lift, even if just for a moment. She pulled away and looked him over, scanning him quickly, but not too obviously. "You look good, Dad." Frank gave a small laugh, then quickly glanced down at his outfit. He'd never been the kind of person to care about clothes or fashion, but today he had tried. The shirt was new. The jeans, not too baggy. He wasn't looking for validation, but hearing Emily's approval felt like a soft breeze after a long winter. "Thanks," he replied. "Been working on it." "Working on what?" "The usual," Frank said, gesturing to his body, then to the table stacked with prepared food. The fridge was full, too: beets, sardines, blueberries. He couldn't have her see the old habits creeping back. "Oh, right, the Elon Musk thing," Emily teased, her eyes dancing with amusement. Frank chuckled. "I wouldn't call it that. More like, living for the future." Emily raised an eyebrow. "That's a little too philosophical for me, but okay. Let's eat. I'm starving." They sat down at the table, the three foods front and center. Frank watched as Emily poked at the sardines, lifting them with a fork. "I thought you hated sardines," she said, giving him a playful, knowing look. "I did," Frank admitted, "but they're not so bad once you get used to them." Emily looked him over again. "You're really serious about this, huh?" Frank nodded, though there was a part of him that still wasn't sure if he could explain all of it. How the food wasn't just about the physical body. How it was about his own redemption. How it was about becoming the version of himself Caroline always hoped he would be. "Yeah," he said softly. "I am." They ate, and the conversation flowed easily, just like old times. But as they got into their dessert, blueberries with a drizzle of honey, Emily grew quiet. Frank noticed, setting his spoon down. "What's on your mind?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. Emily looked at him for a long beat. Then she sighed. "Dad," she started, "I think I'm running away." Frank blinked. "What do you mean?" "Not literally running away. But I've been thinking about what you said, the whole living for the future thing." Frank frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're doing great at school." "That's the thing," Emily replied quietly. "I'm doing great. But I don't feel great. I feel like I'm chasing something that I can't catch. And I don't know if I even want to anymore. She paused, looking at the floor. I thought I'd have it figured out by now. You know. But the more I work for it, the more I'm losing me. Frank's heart softened. It was as if a window had opened into Emily's world. For all the laughter, the phone calls, and the updates on her life, he had missed the quiet distress. The internal struggle. The unspoken doubts that shadowed her success. Emily, he started, but his voice faltered. He hadn't expected this conversation. You don't have to figure it all out, Frank said, finally, his voice steady. You don't need to chase anyone's life. Not even mine. Just be you. Emily met his eyes, her gaze flickering with something fragile. But I don't even know who that is anymore. Frank paused. For a moment, he thought about his own journey, the way he had gotten so lost in the pursuit of answers that he forgot to appreciate the questions. He could see now that it wasn't just about food or fitness. It was about creating space to breathe, to exist in the present, without feeling like you had to prove something every day. You will, he said softly. It takes time. But you will. The conversation shifted after that. They talked about everything and nothing at all. About Emily's plans for the summer, Frank's new routine, and how much he still missed Caroline. But as the hours passed, Frank realized something. Emily wasn't running away from her life. She was trying to find it. And just like him, she needed time to rebuild. To understand that life wasn't about perfection, it was about purpose. Later that night, after they cleaned up the kitchen, Frank gave Emily one last hug. I'm glad you came home, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily smiled. Me too. As she headed upstairs, Frank walked back to the kitchen, tired but at peace. The three foods sat untouched, but now, they didn't feel like a test anymore. They felt like part of the process. Just like him. And Emily. And even Caroline. Frank didn't realize how noisy life had gotten until Emily left again. It wasn't just the house, the silence in here was palpable. It was the space between his thoughts, the hum of the refrigerator, the click of the clock on the wall. All of it felt too loud. But today, there was a strange comfort in it. The morning after Emily left, Frank found himself sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by the same three foods he'd eaten for the past 2 weeks. The routine felt automatic now. The beet juice wasn't as bitter, the sardines didn't make him gag anymore, and the blueberries, well, they'd grown on him. But it was something else that had changed. The stillness. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the presence of peace. The thing about silence, Frank thought, was that it made you hear things you hadn't been paying attention to before. The rustle of the leaves outside. The faint echo of a distant bird's call. The rhythm of his breathing. And the soft, steady beat of his own heart. He realized then that the past few weeks hadn't just been about his body or the foods he was eating. It wasn't even about the physical changes, though they were happening, slowly. It was about something deeper. It was about slowing down. About being present. Maybe that's what Caroline had meant in her letter, the way back to himself wasn't just in taking care of his body. It was in the quiet. Frank sat there for a while, just breathing. And for the first time in a long time, it felt right. The stillness wasn't just something to endure anymore. It was something to embrace. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running from it. He wasn't filling the silence with distractions or noise or even with guilt about what could have been. Later that afternoon, Frank made another video. Not because he had something profound to say, but because he wanted to share this feeling with the world. He wanted to let others know that the power of quiet wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Hey, guys, Frank said, sitting at the kitchen table, his voice calm but steady. I've been thinking a lot about the space between things. The moments when everything's still, when it feels like the world is holding its breath. He paused, his hand tracing the edge of the table as he gathered his thoughts. I used to fill that space with noise. With distractions. With trying to prove something. He leaned forward. But the truth is, sometimes we don't need more. We need less. He paused again, this time for emphasis, letting the silence hang in the air. That's what I'm starting to realize, Frank continued. It's not about getting bigger or stronger. It's about becoming more present. Not just in our bodies, but in our lives. Frank smiled at the camera, feeling a strange sense of contentment wash over him. I'm not perfect. I'm still working on it. But I know this, peace is powerful. And sometimes, the most important thing you can do is stop long enough to hear yourself. He leaned back in his chair, letting the quiet fill the room. Let me know what you think, he added with a grin. I'd love to hear how you found your own peace. The video felt different than the others. There was no pressure to perform. No need for validation. It was just, him. That evening, Frank spent time in the garage again. This time, he didn't clean or rearrange. He just sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, staring at the old shelves of tools and memories. There was a calmness in that space now, a feeling that wasn't rushed, wasn't frenzied. It wasn't that Frank had solved all his problems. But he was learning how to live with them. And that was enough. By the time night fell, Emily called. Her voice was bright, but there was a softness to it that Frank hadn't heard before. How's it going, Dad? She asked. Good, Frank replied, surprised at how natural the answer felt. Really good, actually. Emily chuckled. Wow. You sound different. Like, really different. Frank smiled, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking. And a lot of being. It's nice, actually. He and Emily talked for a while longer. She was doing well, had started an art project she was passionate about and was finally feeling settled in her routine. Frank didn't interrupt. He just listened. For the first time in a long while, he was content to let her speak. As the call ended, Emily said something that made Frank pause. I'm proud of you, Dad. Keep doing what you're doing. It's really working. Frank set the phone down and stared at the wall. She was proud of him. And that felt like enough. The next morning, Frank woke up early and went for a walk. The day was fresh, the sky a soft shade of blue. He walked slowly, not with urgency or intention, but just to be. He watched the clouds roll by, listened to the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and for the first time, didn't feel the weight of time. He was simply living in it. As he walked back to the house, he felt a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It wasn't a smile of accomplishment. It was a smile of peace. And that was everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Frank woke up early that morning with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't because he had figured out all the answers. He still didn't know what the next step would be in his health journey. Or how his life would unfold now that Caroline was gone, or if Emily would ever find the peace she was seeking in her own life. But he didn't feel the overwhelming rush of anxiety that used to grip him either. There was a quiet strength in him now. Not the kind you flex or flaunt, but the kind that was steady, constant, like a tree standing tall through a storm. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't flashy. But it was real. After his morning routine, beet juice, sardines, blueberries, Frank went for a jog. He didn't time himself. He didn't push for a certain distance or speed. He just moved. The world around him felt alive, crisp, cool air filling his lungs, the soft crunch of leaves under his shoes, the sound of birds in the trees. And he realized that he hadn't truly appreciated any of it until recently. The stillness he had embraced was paying off. It wasn't just in the food or the workouts. It was in how he saw everything around him. He returned to the house, sweat on his brow and a small smile tugging at his lips. The fog of doubt that once clouded his mind had lifted. He wasn't chasing perfection anymore. He was living each day as it came, fully, quietly, and with intention. By the time he sat down at his kitchen table for his post-workout meal, the phone rang. It was Emily. "Dad," she said, her voice bright. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday. About peace and being present. And I've decided to take a break from school." Frank paused, his hand hovering over his fork. "A break?" "Yeah. I don't know for how long. But I need to figure out what I really want to do, not just what's expected of me. I'm tired of living up to someone else's idea of success." Frank felt a surge of pride. He'd never told her what to do. He never pressured her. But hearing her voice, strong and clear in her decision, it was as though she had found something in herself that had been hidden. "Emily, that sounds like a big step. But if it feels right, then it is. I'm proud of you." After the call, Frank took a moment to let her words sink in. Emily had been in such a rush to prove herself to the world. But now, she was slowing down. She was learning to listen to her own heart, her own needs. And he was doing the same. The days passed, each one marked by the same simple routine: eat, move, think. But every day felt richer. Every day felt like another brick being placed in the foundation of a life that was still evolving, still becoming. The truth was, Frank had been so focused on the past, on the regrets, the things he hadn't done, that he hadn't realized that the future wasn't a race. It was a path, and it would be there waiting for him when he was ready. One night, Frank sat on the porch with a glass of water, staring up at the stars. The world was still. The sky was endless. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to fill the quiet with thoughts of, what's next? He was content to just be. To exist. To let the universe stretch out before him, vast and full of possibilities. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Rachel. "How's it going?" "Keep pushing." Frank smiled as he typed back. "I am. But pushing isn't the same as rushing anymore. I've found my pace." The next morning, Frank woke up to a notification. Emily had posted something on her social media. The post was simple, a picture of her sitting by a lake, a book in hand, the sun setting behind her. Her caption read, "I'm taking it slow. I'm learning to listen to the quiet. Here's to the journey." Frank stared at the post for a long moment, his heart full. This wasn't about the food, the exercise, or the video updates. This was about finding peace, finding strength in the quiet moments. By the time Frank finished his breakfast, he knew that his journey wasn't just his own anymore. It was intertwined with Emily's, with Caroline's, with Rachel's, and with everyone who had supported him along the way. The change wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a sudden transformation. But it was steady. It was the quiet strength of someone who had stopped running. Who had stopped chasing an ideal. Who had learned that the most important part of living was showing up each day, exactly as you are. Frank stood up and grabbed his phone. He was about to record another video for his channel, but this time, it wasn't about fitness. It wasn't about motivation. It was about being real. He hit record. "Hey, everyone. It's Frank again. I just wanted to take a minute to talk about something I've been thinking about a lot lately, quiet strength." He paused, adjusting the camera. Then, with a smile, he continued. "I've spent a lot of time trying to fix myself. Trying to find the next best thing, the next big step. But the truth is, I'm learning that sometimes, the strength we need is already inside us. It's in the silence. In the moments when we're not trying to prove anything. He took a deep breath. So if you're out there, struggling to get it all together, just remember, sometimes, it's okay to slow down. Sometimes, peace is more powerful than the rush. He smiled. Thanks for being part of this journey with me. Frank hit stop on the recording and sat back, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. He didn't need approval from anyone. He didn't need validation. The journey he was on was his, and it was enough. Change was never easy for Frank, but as he sat in his living room one quiet afternoon, the realization settled in, change was no longer something to fear. A year ago, Frank would have bristled at the thought of change. The idea of stepping outside of his comfortable routine, the one he had built after Caroline's passing, felt overwhelming. He had feared that doing something new might push him further from the person he had become. But now, change wasn't something to avoid. It was something to embrace. The quiet strength he had been cultivating, the peace, the stillness, wasn't just a reflection of his physical transformation. It was a reflection of his evolving mind. He had always been a man of habits. In fact, it was the habits that kept him grounded after everything had fallen apart. His morning routine with the 3 foods, beet juice, sardines, and blueberries, had become his anchor. His steady, reliable constant. But lately, he had felt a pull. The need for something more. He knew that, just as his body had adapted to his new routine, his mind was craving a new challenge. It was as if the quiet was offering him something deeper, something more personal. And for the first time in a long time, Frank had the courage to lean into that feeling. The phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Rachel. "How's the journey going? Have you tried changing things up a bit? I know you're all about the steady routine, but I was thinking a little flexibility might be good. What do you think?" Frank smiled. Rachel always seemed to know when to push him, even when he wasn't quite ready for it. He thought about it for a while. The idea of breaking free from his tightly controlled routine felt daunting, but also, liberating. Rachel's suggestion was just the nudge he needed. Maybe it was time to try something new. To evolve. After he finished his breakfast, beet juice, sardines, and blueberries, of course, Frank decided to go for a walk to think things through. As he strolled through the neighborhood, the vibrant colors of autumn filled the streets, crimson and gold leaves scattering beneath his feet, the crisp air pulling at his coat. He hadn't noticed how much he had started to appreciate the changing seasons. A part of him felt a deep connection to it. Just like the seasons, he too was in a constant state of change. His body was stronger than it had been in years, but his mind was still adapting, learning, growing. He found himself standing at the edge of a park, watching the children play. Their laughter echoed across the space, and he smiled. They seemed to know something he was just now beginning to grasp, that life wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about getting it right every time. It was about embracing the flow. The freedom to laugh, to fall, to get back up. By the time he got home, Frank had made up his mind. Change was coming, and he was ready to take it on. That evening, he got on a video call with Emily. "So, what's new with you?" Frank asked, as they both settled in. Emily smiled. "Actually, Dad, I've been thinking a lot about you lately. About your videos and how much they've changed. You seem different. Calmer. Like you're really living this whole process." Frank chuckled. "Well, I guess you could say I've learned to slow down. Not everything has to be done at 100 miles an hour, right?" Emily nodded. "Exactly. And I've been trying to do the same. I feel like I've been in a constant race, but I'm starting to realize it's not about winning. It's about enjoying the journey." Frank's heart swelled with pride. Emily had found her own rhythm, too. Her own peace. "Good for you, sweetheart," he said softly. "It's a lesson I'm still learning myself. But I think I'm getting there." After their call ended, Frank found himself deep in thought. He had spent so much of his life chasing something, whether it was perfection or success or validation. But now, he was learning that the true measure of a life well lived wasn't in the accolades or the accomplishments. It was in the moments of peace, the moments of connection, and the quiet strength to face whatever came next. And he knew that the road ahead would bring more change. It was inevitable. But he didn't have to fear it anymore. The next morning, Frank tried something different. Instead of his usual routine, he swapped out his beet juice for a green smoothie, adding kale, spinach, and chia seeds. He had read about the benefits of greens, and though the idea of a smoothie didn't exactly thrill him, he was excited about the change. It wasn't a huge change. But it felt significant. As the day went on, Frank could feel the subtle shift within him. He was no longer rigid in his thinking. He wasn't bound by the old ways he had clung to so tightly for years. He was learning to listen, to grow, to change, and most importantly, to trust himself through it all. The old Frank might have been scared to try something new. But the man he was becoming, well, he was ready. That evening, as Frank prepared his dinner, a new recipe involving grilled salmon and quinoa, he reflected on the day. He was embracing change in small ways, but it felt monumental. He felt alive. He knew there would be challenges ahead. Change wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. And through it all, he would continue to stay grounded in the one constant that had never let him down, his quiet strength. Frank set the table, enjoying the familiar rhythm of preparing a meal. The smell of the fish filled the kitchen, and as he sat down to eat, he realized that the true journey wasn't about becoming someone different, it was about becoming more himself. And in that, he found peace. It was a Thursday morning when Frank realized something profound: old patterns weren't broken overnight. They didn't just fall away. They had to be deliberately disrupted, torn apart, piece by piece, until their hold on him no longer felt as strong. For the past few months, Frank had been living a life that felt foreign to him. It wasn't the life of anxiety and rushing. It wasn't the life of constant pressure to perform. This new life was slower, quieter, and more intentional. Yet, even in the stillness, there was a whisper in the back of his mind, an old voice that insisted he should be doing more. That he should be pushing harder. He had spent so many years attached to the idea of pushing beyond limits, of achieving and achieving and achieving, that letting go of that mindset was like cutting off an old friend. A friend he had depended on, even though that friend was no longer serving him. But that morning, as Frank sipped his green smoothie, his second attempt at breaking his routine, he realized that this was it. He was breaking the pattern. The pattern that told him he needed to be something else in order to be enough. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden glow across the kitchen. He had always been an early riser, but lately, those early mornings had become his time of reflection. Time to just sit with his thoughts before the world rushed in. Frank turned his thoughts back to the idea of breaking old patterns. It wasn't just about food, or exercise, or any one particular habit. It was about dismantling the mindsets that had been ingrained in him over decades. Mindsets that told him success was measured by how much he could accomplish, by how quickly he could move from one thing to the next. But wasn't there more to life than the race? As he stared out the window, Frank considered the changes that had taken place in his life over the last several months. His body had transformed, he was stronger, healthier, and more energized than he'd been in years. His daily routines had become rituals, and each meal, each workout, each moment of stillness felt like a small victory. But the real change was internal. It was in his mind. He wasn't living for the next goal or the next achievement. He was living for the moment, allowing himself to truly experience each moment without the pressure of needing to make it better. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He walked over and opened it, finding Emily standing there, holding a coffee cup and a bright smile. "Morning, Dad," she said, stepping inside. "Got time for a chat?" Frank couldn't help but grin. "Of course. Always time for you. They sat down at the kitchen table, the familiar scent of Frank's breakfast filling the air. I wanted to tell you something, Emily began, her voice a little more serious than usual. I've been thinking a lot about what you've said to me recently, about slowing down, about not chasing things so hard. Frank nodded, encouraging her to continue. I'm feeling kind of stuck, Emily admitted. I've spent all this time trying to meet everyone's expectations. I'm doing all these things because I think I'm supposed to, not because they actually make me happy. And I think I've been doing that my whole life. Frank listened carefully. He'd seen the same patterns in her that he had once seen in himself, the drive to be successful, to keep moving, to keep pushing. You know, Frank said slowly, I get it. I've been there. And breaking those old patterns, it's hard. It feels like you're betraying who you were. But the truth is, the patterns that no longer serve us, well, they're holding us back. Emily sat back, clearly thinking over his words. So, you really believe that I can just change things? That I don't have to keep running after success like everyone says I should? Frank smiled. Absolutely. It's not about changing who you are, it's about becoming more of who you really are. The rest will fall into place. As they talked, Frank realized just how much of a mirror Emily was to him. She was still trying to figure out how to break free from the invisible expectations that had been placed on her. And just like him, she had to learn to unlearn. The conversation made him think about his own journey once again. He had spent so much of his life trying to conform, trying to achieve, trying to measure up. And now, here he was, breaking those patterns and finding freedom in it. He remembered the pressure of those old patterns. How they would make him feel guilty when he wasn't constantly striving, when he wasn't constantly doing more. They made him believe that being enough wasn't about just being present. It was about proving himself over and over again. That afternoon, Frank decided to take a bold step. He'd been thinking for a while about trying something completely outside his comfort zone, something that didn't follow the predictable path he had always walked. He decided to try yoga. At first, he felt silly just thinking about it. Yoga? Wasn't that for younger people or the more flexible? But there was something inside him that told him to just try. It wasn't about being good at it. It was about breaking the pattern. It was about doing something that challenged the bold Frank, the man who thought he had to be tough all the time, who thought there was only one way to be strong. The first yoga class was humbling, to say the least. Frank had to admit, he wasn't as flexible as he thought. His legs wobbled through some of the poses, and his mind wandered, tempted to call it quits. But he stuck with it. By the end of the session, Frank found himself lying on the mat in the final pose, feeling the weight of his body sinking into the floor. The instructor's soft voice reminded them to let go of any expectations, to simply be in the moment. In that stillness, Frank felt a wave of calm wash over him. He wasn't trying to achieve anything. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply present. For the first time in a long time, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. That evening, Frank told Emily about the yoga class. She listened intently, and when he finished, she smiled. I'm proud of you, Dad. I think we're both learning to let go of those old patterns. Frank chuckled softly. Yeah, it's harder than it seems. But I'm trying. We both are. They shared a quiet moment, both of them understanding that life wasn't about fighting against change, it was about accepting it. And sometimes, the best way to break free from the patterns was to simply stop fighting. As Frank went to bed that night, he reflected on the journey. His body had changed. His mind was changing. His life was changing. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, one thing was clear, the patterns that once controlled him no longer had the power they once did. Frank was ready for whatever came next. As Frank stood in front of his bathroom mirror that morning, something felt different. For weeks, he had been experimenting with new routines, adjusting his diet, trying yoga, taking time to reflect. Each small change felt like a victory, but today, something clicked. Today, he finally felt the shift wasn't just physical or mental, it was spiritual. The word balance had been echoing in his mind for days. His life, once filled with chaos and urgency, had become a delicate dance of priorities. The drive to achieve, to push forward at all costs, had always been his compass, but now, he realized he was learning to trust something more subtle, the art of letting go. Frank wiped his face with a damp cloth and smiled faintly. The man looking back at him had changed. He wasn't the same man who had, just months ago, been burdened by the weight of expectations, his own and everyone else's. He was learning that finding peace didn't come from trying harder. It came from doing less. From simplifying. That day, Frank met Rachel for lunch at their favorite local cafe. They had been trying to catch up more often since Rachel had started her own wellness journey, inspired by Frank's transformation. "Dad," Rachel said as she stirred her iced tea, "I think I get it now. About finding balance." Frank raised an eyebrow, curious. "Oh yeah? Tell me what you mean." Rachel smiled, a hint of excitement in her eyes. "Well, remember how I told you I was going to try a new way of working out? I've been experimenting with just walking in the mornings. No pressure. I don't keep track of my steps, and I don't try to go faster than I can. It's like, just walking, for the sake of walking. And I've felt so much better. I think I've been focused on results all these years that I forgot to enjoy the process." Frank nodded. "That's exactly it. It's about letting go of the pressure to always be doing more. Sometimes, it's just about being present in the moment." Rachel looked out the window for a moment, lost in thought. "I think I've been doing that in other parts of my life, too. Trying to fill up every second with something productive. Work, errands, schedules. But what if I just stopped? What if I didn't have to make everything productive?" Frank leaned in, intrigued by what she was saying. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean," Rachel continued, "I've been focusing so much on how much I can get done, I've forgotten what it feels like to just be. To just take time to relax, to listen to music, to do something for the sake of doing it. Not everything has to have a goal." Frank chuckled. "Sounds familiar. That's exactly how I felt when I started yoga. I wasn't trying to achieve anything, I was just trying to experience it." Rachel smiled, her eyes lighting up with understanding. "Exactly. And I think that's where the real balance comes from. Not forcing myself into a box, not trying to live up to other people's expectations. Just finding my own rhythm and sticking with it, no matter what anyone else says." Frank sat back, taking in her words. There was a quiet strength in Rachel's voice, a sense of clarity that he admired. In many ways, she had come to the same realization he had: life wasn't about constantly striving for perfection. It was about finding peace in the imperfection, in the moment-to-moment ebb and flow of life. That afternoon, as Frank walked back home, he couldn't help but think about the conversation with Rachel. His daughter was right. She had discovered the most important lesson of all. The lesson he had spent his whole life trying to grasp: balance wasn't about doing everything perfectly, it was about understanding when to push forward and when to rest. It was about feeling the rhythm of life and knowing when to join in the dance and when to step back and breathe. It occurred to him that all this time, he had been so focused on improving himself, on pushing his body to its limits, that he had neglected to slow down and just be. Frank decided, that very afternoon, to take a break from his usual routine. He went outside, sat on the porch with a book, and just relaxed. For the first time in weeks, he let his mind wander. No phone, no interruptions, just the simple pleasure of doing nothing. Later that evening, Frank reflected on his day. There had been a sense of contentment he hadn't felt in years, a deep, quiet satisfaction that came from simply being present. No agenda. No goals. Just a peaceful acceptance of life as it was. It wasn't the first time he had experienced this feeling, but it was the first time he had truly understood it. Balance wasn't something you could force. It wasn't something you could control. It was a way of living, of accepting where you were in the moment and choosing to live it fully, no matter what. The next morning, Frank woke up early and decided to take his morning walk, as he had been doing for months. But today, something was different. Instead of focusing on his pace or his route, he let his body move naturally. He focused on the air against his skin, the rustling of the leaves, the songs of birds in the trees. He smiled as he walked, breathing deeply. By the time he returned home, Frank felt a deep sense of gratitude. His body had become stronger through consistent practice. His mind had become more focused, less scattered. But now, he understood that it wasn't just about the body or the mind. It was about integrating both, learning to appreciate the balance between effort and ease, movement and stillness. He sat down at the kitchen table with his morning coffee and reflected on the journey so far. Life had never been about achieving the next big thing. It had always been about finding harmony within the chaos. And maybe, just maybe, he had finally found that peace. Later that afternoon, Frank got a call from Emily. They had been texting back and forth about her own life changes lately, and he could tell something was weighing on her mind. "Hey, Dad," Emily said, her voice quiet. "I've been thinking a lot about balance lately. About everything you've been talking about. I've been putting so much pressure on myself. Work, relationships, everything, and I think I've lost sight of what really matters." Frank's heart swelled with pride. "I get it, Emily. It's hard to stop the rush. But sometimes, slowing down is where you find the clarity you've been searching for." They spoke for a while longer, both of them sharing the weight of their thoughts. When the conversation ended, Frank felt a profound sense of connection, not just with Emily, but with himself. He had learned so much, and it seemed that his journey was now helping others. The ripple effect of change was spreading far beyond his own life. As Frank sat in his living room that evening, he reflected on everything he had learned about balance, change, and the beauty of embracing imperfection. The peace he had long sought had always been there. He just had to stop chasing it. And in doing so, he had finally found it. It had been a few weeks since Frank's realization that balance was the key to true well-being. He had experienced a new kind of strength emerging within him, one that wasn't about how much he could lift or how fast he could run. It was a quiet strength, the kind that came from embracing life's ebb and flow, rather than constantly fighting against it. That morning, Frank stood in his garage, looking at his old set of weights. The dumbbells had been a symbol of his former self, the version of him who was obsessed with pushing limits, with proving his strength through sheer force. The man who saw every challenge as something to overcome, every pain as something to fight through. But now, as he stood there in the quiet of the morning, he felt no urge to lift those weights. Instead, he turned toward the bike he'd recently acquired, one of the smaller, more compact ones that didn't require too much effort but still offered a good workout. A few months ago, this would have felt like a step backward. If he wasn't lifting weights or running long distances, was he really doing enough? Was he still being strong? But today, Frank smiled. He knew better now. Strength wasn't about how heavy the weight was, or how fast he could go, it was about being consistent, about doing what was sustainable for his body and mind. As he pedaled down the quiet streets, Frank felt the cool breeze on his face, the rhythm of his breath in sync with each rotation of the pedals. There was something almost meditative about it, something peaceful in the simple movement. It was a new kind of strength, one that didn't have to prove anything. One that simply was. It had taken him months to fully understand that strength wasn't about forcing his body to achieve certain results. It was about finding a balance between challenge and ease, between rest and effort. Over the years, Frank had been so focused on the outward, visible markers of strength. Muscle tone, endurance, speed. But now, he saw it differently. True strength, he realized, came from listening to your body and honoring what it needed. After his ride, Frank returned home feeling calm but energized, satisfied not by the effort, but by the process. He stepped inside, where Rachel was already sipping her morning tea at the kitchen table. "Morning, Dad. How's the ride?" she asked, eyes lighting up as he entered. "Good," Frank replied, leaning against the counter. "You know, it's funny. I always thought strength meant lifting heavy weights, running long distances. But now, I'm starting to think that real strength is about finding what feels right for you. About not forcing your body to do something it's not ready for." Rachel smiled knowingly. "I've been thinking about that too. I've been walking every day now, and it's been so refreshing. No pressure. Just walking for the sake of it. It's kind of like a workout for my mind as well as my body." Frank chuckled. "Exactly. I think that's the key, no pressure. Just doing things because they feel good, because they make sense for where you are in life." Later that afternoon, as Frank worked in the garden, he found himself reflecting on the journey he had taken. He was no longer the man obsessed with the numbers, with the visible signs of achievement. His goals had changed. His definition of success had shifted. And in many ways, he felt stronger than ever. Frank hadn't anticipated how deep this shift would go. It wasn't just about diet, exercise, or breaking old patterns anymore. It was about accepting himself as he was. No longer chasing after some distant version of himself, but embracing the man he had become. It was liberating in ways he hadn't imagined. A couple of hours later, Frank sat down with his dinner, his typical meal of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and a side of quinoa. He had come to enjoy these meals, not because they were strictly healthy, but because they made him feel good. They gave him energy and nourishment, and he didn't have to overthink it. Rachel joined him at the table, and they talked about their days, small talk, but it felt meaningful in a way that had been absent before. The space between them had grown warmer, gentler. It was no longer about expectations or the pressure of achievements. It was just about being present with each other. That evening, as they cleaned up together, Rachel spoke up. "Dad, I've been thinking. You've really changed a lot lately. Not just in how you take care of yourself, but in how you think about things. You've been so much more calm, you know." Frank paused, wiping the counter. "I think it's because I stopped fighting so hard, Rachel. I stopped believing that strength meant always doing more. It's about doing what feels right for me." Rachel nodded. "Yeah, I can see that. You're not trying to impress anyone anymore. You're just living." Frank smiled. "Exactly. And that feels like the most important thing I've learned." The next morning, Frank woke up early, as usual, but today he felt a different kind of energy, a quiet, centered energy. It wasn't the kind of energy that came from frantic action or from pushing himself past his limits. It was the energy that came from balance, from respecting his body's needs, and from choosing to make mindful decisions about how he spent his time and energy. He decided to start his day with a walk, but this time, he would take it slower than usual. Instead of aiming for a particular distance or speed, he walked with no agenda, simply enjoying the sensation of movement and the quiet morning. As he walked through the neighborhood, he thought about all the times he had pushed himself, all the times he had felt inadequate because he wasn't doing enough. He had always thought strength meant pushing harder, faster, better. But now, he understood the truth: strength wasn't about competing with anyone, not even with himself. It was about accepting where he was, at every moment, and choosing to move forward with awareness, not force. By the time Frank returned home, he felt more at peace than he had in years. His body felt strong, but not because of the miles he'd walked or the weight he'd lifted. It was the quiet strength of understanding, of knowing that strength was something that didn't have to be forced. It came naturally when you stopped fighting against life, and started flowing with it. Later that day, Rachel came over, and they talked more about the journey they were both on. She was continuing to experiment with different forms of exercise, taking time to slow down when she needed to. They were both learning the same lesson: strength wasn't about pushing yourself to the limit, but about embracing the moment and allowing life to unfold without resistance. Frank smiled, content. His definition of strength had evolved. He wasn't the man who used to measure success by how much he could accomplish. He was the man who had learned to live with grace and balance, to find peace in the imperfection of life. And in that peace, he had found a strength that was more enduring than anything he had known before. Frank had always been the kind of person who liked immediate results. Whether it was a new fitness routine, a business venture, or a project at home, he liked to see progress quickly. But as he walked down the path of his newfound understanding of health and wellness, he realized that instant results were the antithesis of long-lasting change. It had been a few months now since Frank had begun his journey of balance and consistency. At first, he hadn't seen much progress. His muscles didn't feel noticeably stronger, and his energy levels didn't feel drastically different. But now, as the days passed, he began to notice small but significant changes. He no longer felt the need to push himself to the edge. He wasn't measuring his success by the weights he lifted or the distances he ran. Instead, he measured his success by something much more subtle: the way he felt when he woke up, the way his body responded to gentle movement, and most importantly, how calm and centered his mind had become. This new perspective on health had gradually transformed Frank's approach to life. It wasn't about doing everything all at once or expecting dramatic, instant transformations. It was about consistency. The key was to stay steady and committed, making small, positive changes every day without obsessing over the results. That morning, as Frank prepared his breakfast, a simple combination of oatmeal, fruit, and a dash of honey, he smiled. The routine had become second nature. He no longer had to force himself to make these healthy choices. They just were part of his day. It wasn't about a dramatic transformation but about creating a habit that sustained him. He found that the more he practiced consistency, the more rewarding it felt. There were no wild fluctuations, no ups and downs. Just steady improvement. It was as though the slow, steady rhythm of life had started to align with his new approach to health. Rachel had been following in Frank's footsteps, adopting a more balanced approach to her life as well. The other day, she had called him, excited to share how she had managed to integrate her newfound wellness habits into her busy schedule. She had started by walking in the mornings and eating simple, nourishing meals. Instead of focusing on how quickly she could get fit or how much weight she could lose, she focused on making consistent, sustainable changes. "I feel more alive than I have in years, Dad," she had told him. "And the best part? It doesn't feel like a chore. It feels natural." As Frank sat down to eat his breakfast, he reflected on Rachel's words. There was something profoundly powerful about consistency that couldn't be overlooked. The world was obsessed with quick fixes, whether it was a fad diet, a workout trend, or a new supplement. But true transformation didn't happen overnight. It came through the simple act of showing up every day, doing the things that mattered, and trusting that the results would come in time. Later that afternoon, Frank found himself in the park, taking a walk as he often did now. The air was cool and crisp, and the leaves rustled gently as they fell from the trees. He felt a deep sense of calm wash over him as he moved along the path. It wasn't that he wasn't working hard, it was that he had come to understand that progress didn't have to be rushed. Every step he took was part of a longer journey, and he could take his time without the fear of falling behind. As he walked, Frank thought about all the years he had spent chasing after fleeting moments of success. Whether it was a promotion, a fitness milestone, or an outward symbol of achievement, he had always been racing against some invisible clock, never truly appreciating the journey itself. But now, the journey was the destination. It wasn't about getting somewhere. It was about being present, being consistent, and moving at a pace that felt right for him. Frank's phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Emily. "Hey, Dad, I've been thinking about what you said the other day. I feel like I've been pushing myself too hard at work and not giving myself enough time to slow down. I'm going to try taking it easier, focusing on small wins instead of the big picture all the time. What do you think? Frank smiled as he read her message. He felt proud of her for recognizing the need to balance ambition with rest. He replied quickly. I think that's a great idea, Em. Consistency is key. Small wins every day add up to big results. Don't forget to be kind to yourself along the way. You're doing great. He tucked the phone back into his pocket, feeling more connected to his children than ever. They were all learning the same lesson, at different points in their lives. Life was not about perfection or instant results. It was about showing up every day, taking care of your body, mind, and relationships, and trusting the process. As Frank continued his walk, he thought about the changes he had made over the past few months. At first, they had felt small, insignificant even. But now, with time, those changes had accumulated into something much bigger. His mornings had become a peaceful routine, his body felt more capable than ever, and his mind had become clearer. Most importantly, he no longer felt the constant need to prove something to himself or others. Later that evening, Frank sat down with his family for dinner. The table was filled with simple, healthy foods, grilled chicken, sautéed vegetables, and a side of quinoa. It wasn't fancy, but it was nourishing, and that was enough. Over dinner, Frank couldn't help but feel grateful. He had found peace in consistency. It wasn't glamorous or flashy, but it was steady, and it worked. Rachel caught his eye and smiled. I've been thinking about what you said, Dad. I've been focusing more on doing what feels good, not just on results. It's really changed how I approach everything, work, exercise, even relationships. Frank raised his glass. That's the secret, Rachel. It's not about the result, it's about the journey. Just keep showing up every day. That night, as Frank prepared for bed, he thought about the steady rhythm of his life now. The small wins had become the foundation for something bigger, something more sustainable. He knew that the next day would bring its own challenges and victories, but he was ready. He had learned to trust the process, and he knew that with patience and consistency, the results would come. It was early morning when Frank stood in his backyard, the first light of dawn creeping over the horizon. The cool air kissed his skin as he took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt at ease, comfortable with his body, comfortable with his choices. And yet, there was a question that lingered in his mind: how had he gotten here? It wasn't just about the routine of daily walks or the healthy meals he had been eating. It was about the shift that had happened in his mindset, the change in the way he viewed his body, aging, and life itself. A few months ago, Frank would have scoffed at the idea that he could be happy without chasing constant achievements. He would have considered it an excuse to settle for mediocrity, to not push himself to his fullest potential. But now, looking back, he saw just how wrong he had been. The pursuit of more success, more power, more strength, had often made him feel exhausted, unfulfilled, and, at times, disconnected from the very people he loved. He remembered how, in his younger years, he was always so focused on the next milestone. In his 30s, it was about building his career. In his 40s, it was about staying in shape and impressing his peers with his fitness. And now, in his 60s, it had become about maintaining his health, of simply surviving the inevitable march of time. But what he hadn't realized back then was that each phase of his life demanded a different approach, a different mindset. Strength didn't always have to be about pushing harder. It was about adapting, evolving, and accepting what each phase of life brought. The real turning point had come when Frank had started listening to his body rather than demanding more from it. He had spent years ignoring the signals his body had been sending: fatigue, aches, stress. His mind, always focused on achieving, never allowed him the grace to slow down and reflect. But now, everything had changed. He had learned the importance of rest, of giving himself permission to take a break when he needed it. Rachel had been his mirror throughout this process. As Frank took on these new habits, she had started to do the same. At first, she had been skeptical about embracing a slower pace. Like Frank in his younger years, she had believed that everything had to be fast-paced, that success and progress were linked to constant action. But now, she too had realized that it was the moments of stillness, the times when she chose to pause and reflect, that were helping her grow. That afternoon, Frank called Rachel to check in on her. He had been thinking about their conversations recently, especially about how they were both embracing this new way of living. "Hey, Dad." Rachel answered on the first ring, her voice warm and light. "What's up?" "I was just thinking," Frank said, sitting down in his favorite chair by the window, "about how far we've both come in such a short time. I mean, look at us, who would have thought we'd be talking about slowing down and embracing consistency rather than constantly pushing forward?" Rachel laughed, a sound that made Frank's heart swell. "Yeah, it's funny how things change, isn't it? I used to think that pushing harder and faster was the only way to succeed. But now, it's all about balance. I'm actually starting to enjoy the process more than the result." Frank nodded as he looked out the window at the sunlight filtering through the trees. "Exactly. It's like we've learned that life isn't a race. It's more of a journey, with its own rhythm and flow. We're not trying to outrun time anymore, we're learning to move with it." There was a long pause, and Frank could hear Rachel taking a deep breath on the other end of the line. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," she said quietly. "And it's kind of freeing, you know. Not constantly worrying about the finish line, but just enjoying where I am." Frank smiled, feeling a sense of pride wash over him. "You're right. There's something powerful about letting go of that constant pressure to achieve and just being. It doesn't mean we stop growing or improving, it just means we're doing it in a way that respects our needs, our energy, and our limits." Later that evening, Frank stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. His body felt strong, but not because of some intense workout session. He was simply moving, gently and without urgency, as his body guided him. The past few months had brought him to this place, a place of acceptance, balance, and peace. He wasn't trying to force anything. Instead, he had learned to flow with life, trusting that his body, his mind, and his spirit would adapt to whatever came his way. As he finished preparing the meal, he thought about the foods he had introduced into his life, the ones that had helped him feel more energized and nourished. The 3 foods he had learned about. Those that Elon Musk recommended for optimal health, had become staples in his diet: blueberries, almonds, and salmon. These foods weren't just about fuel, they were about well-being. Frank had discovered that health wasn't just a physical endeavor, it was a mental and emotional one as well. The right foods gave him the strength to face the day with clarity, focus, and energy. Rachel joined him for dinner that night, and they sat down at the table together, sharing their thoughts about the changes they had both made. As they ate, Frank felt a deep sense of gratitude for this journey he had embarked upon, not just for the physical improvements, but for the mental and emotional growth that had come with it. "You know," Rachel said, between bites of her salmon, "I've been reflecting a lot about how I used to live my life. It was always about being busy and achieving something. But now, I'm learning that sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. Just being present. And in that stillness, I find a kind of strength I never knew existed." Frank raised his glass in agreement. That's it. Strength doesn't always have to look like effort. Sometimes, it's the quiet moments of awareness that hold the most power. The next day, Frank went for his usual morning walk, but this time, he felt even more at peace. The beauty of the world seemed to shine brighter, the golden hues of the rising sun, the birds singing in the trees, the soft crunch of the gravel underfoot. Frank wasn't rushing toward anything. He wasn't trying to achieve a goal. He was simply walking, enjoying the moment, and letting life unfold at its own pace. As he continued his walk, he thought about the shift in his perspective. He had spent so many years chasing after achievements, believing that they would bring him happiness and fulfillment. But now, he saw the truth. The true power of life lay not in the pursuit of more, but in the acceptance of what was already here. With each step, Frank felt more in tune with his body and mind, more connected to the present moment. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that he had reached the ultimate goal, peace. The morning sun shone gently through the curtains, casting soft beams across Frank's living room. It was a peaceful, ordinary day, but to Frank, it felt extraordinary. The life he had once considered rushed and chaotic had slowly transformed into something calm and deliberate. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't flashy, but it was real, and it was enough. He had embraced the new normal, the one where life wasn't about chasing after constant improvements or meeting external expectations. Instead, it was about listening to his body, nurturing his mind, and fostering deeper relationships. Frank had learned that well-being wasn't a destination, it was a practice, one that unfolded gently over time. The past several months had shown him how much he had overlooked in the hustle for success. He had once believed that doing more was the secret to happiness, but now, he had come to understand that less could sometimes be more. Less stress, less pressure, less focus on things that didn't truly matter. In this newfound space, Frank had discovered that the richness of life came from the small moments, those seemingly insignificant parts of the day that, when strung together, became the thread of a meaningful life. The biggest change, perhaps, was the way Frank viewed his role as a father. He had always tried to be the strong, unshakable figure. The one who had the answers, the one who had it all together. But as he had embraced the vulnerability of aging and the wisdom that came with it, he realized that his role was not to provide all the answers. Instead, it was to listen, to guide, and to support his children as they carved their own paths. Rachel had been the first to reflect the shifts in Frank's life. She had shared her own realizations with him during their late-night talks. In her own way, she had started to embrace this new normal, moving away from the fast-paced, high-pressure life she once led. And, in a sense, Frank saw how they had both arrived at the same destination, each through their own winding path. That morning, as Frank prepared a light breakfast, his usual combination of oatmeal, walnuts, and berries, he reflected on his changing approach to food. It was no longer about eating to look good or to meet a particular fitness goal. It was about eating to feel good, to nourish his body, and to sustain his energy. In the past, he might have skipped breakfast or eaten something quick and unhealthy, thinking he could make up for it later in the day. But now, he understood that each meal was an opportunity to show his body respect, an opportunity to fuel his day in the best way possible. As he sat down to enjoy his breakfast, his phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Emily. "Hey Dad, I was thinking about how I've been approaching work lately. I've been trying to do everything at once, and it's wearing me out. I remember you telling me to focus on what matters most. I'm going to try that today, prioritizing the important stuff. Wish me luck." Frank smiled as he read the message, proud of his daughter for taking the time to reflect. He replied quickly. "You've got this, Em. Remember, it's not about doing everything, it's about doing what truly matters. Take your time and trust the process. You'll be surprised by how much more you can accomplish when you focus on the right things." Frank sent the message and sat back in his chair, savoring the quiet of the morning. There was a sense of contentment that had settled into his life, one that he hadn't known was possible before. He no longer felt the pull of constant ambition, the nagging desire to achieve more and more. Instead, he felt grounded, present, and at peace. Later that afternoon, Frank went for one of his regular walks in the park. It had become his favorite time of the day, a time to be alone with his thoughts, to reflect on the past, and to embrace the present. As he walked, he noticed the birds overhead, the rustle of the wind in the trees, and the laughter of children in the distance. The world was moving around him, and he was part of it, but he no longer felt the need to chase after it. He had learned the power of patience, of letting go of the need to constantly strive for more. It didn't mean he had stopped setting goals or working toward them, it just meant that he had shifted his focus. Instead of obsessing over the outcome, he now focused on the process, on the journey rather than the destination. Rachel had started to incorporate these same principles into her own life. She had called him the other night, excited to share her progress. "I've been trying to slow down and focus on the present, Dad," she had told him. "It's not easy, but I'm learning to prioritize. Not everything has to happen right now." Frank had been touched by her words. She was growing into someone he could not only be proud of, but someone he could learn from, too. He realized that they were on a parallel path, both of them finding wisdom in slowing down, in focusing on what truly mattered. The next morning, Frank woke up early, feeling rested and refreshed. It was a Saturday, and he had planned a small gathering at his house, a dinner with his children. The idea had started as a casual thought, but now it felt like the perfect way to reconnect with those he loved. As he began preparing, he thought about the simple meals they had been making recently. There was no need for extravagant dishes or fancy ingredients, just wholesome, nutritious food that nourished their bodies and souls. He had learned that the most important thing wasn't what they ate, but how they shared it. The conversations that flowed during dinner, the laughter, the moments of connection, those were the things that truly mattered. Later that evening, as everyone sat down at the table, Frank couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. The years had passed quickly, and he had learned so much along the way. He had learned the power of consistency, the importance of slowing down, and the value of focusing on the process rather than the result. And most importantly, he had learned that happiness wasn't something to chase, it was something to embrace, right here and now. As the meal came to a close, Rachel raised her glass. "Here's to embracing the journey," she said with a smile. Frank nodded, raising his glass in return. To the journey, indeed. The night continued with laughter, shared memories, and moments of reflection. Frank felt a sense of peace settle in his heart. This was his new normal, and it was more than enough. It was a quiet Sunday morning when Frank first began to realize the full scope of the changes he had undergone. As he sipped his coffee and watched the sun rise over the horizon, he thought about the journey he had taken, not just for himself, but for his entire family. His shift in perspective, choosing peace over pressure, nourishment over indulgence, hadn't just impacted his own life. It had rippled out, slowly, gently, and transformed the lives of those around him. Frank had never been one for grand gestures. He had always believed that change came from small, consistent actions over time. That philosophy had served him well, and now, as he sat in his favorite chair by the window, he realized how powerful that quiet transformation had been. It wasn't the loud proclamations of change that had made a difference, it was the subtle ways in which his family had embraced new habits, new ways of thinking, and new ways of relating to one another. It wasn't just the physical changes, although those had been profound. Frank had more energy than he had in years, and his body, though older, felt stronger. It wasn't just the way he had embraced his diet, either. The three foods that had become staples in his life, blueberries, almonds, and salmon, had become more than just fuel, they had become symbols of his new approach to life. They were a reminder that health wasn't just a goal to achieve, it was a way of living, of nourishing both body and mind. What struck him, though, was how this shift in his approach had started to influence those closest to him. Rachel had started her own transformation. She wasn't just focused on her career anymore. Yes, she still worked hard, but she had learned how to balance her ambitions with time for herself, for her family, and for her well-being. Frank had watched with pride as Rachel found more time for the things that mattered most. She had reconnected with old friends, spent more time outdoors, and most importantly, learned to say no to the things that didn't serve her. It hadn't been easy. Like Frank, Rachel had spent much of her life chasing success, never pausing long enough to savor the simple joys of life. But when she had seen how her father's health had improved, how he had become more grounded and more present, she knew she needed to make changes in her own life. The transformation hadn't been quick, but it had been steady. And, like Frank, Rachel had found peace in the process. As he thought about his children, Frank realized that the ripple effect was growing wider. Emily, his youngest daughter, had started embracing the same principles, too. She'd been working long hours at her tech startup, burning the candle at both ends, but lately, she had begun to scale back. Her phone calls had become more thoughtful, her texts more intentional. She wasn't just asking for advice about work anymore. She was asking about life. One evening, a few weeks ago, Emily had reached out to him, wanting to talk. Frank had anticipated the usual questions about business and personal growth, but this time, the conversation was different. She had wanted to know how he had managed to embrace change so gracefully. How had he navigated the shift in mindset from pushing to resting? How had he found balance in a world that demanded constant hustle? Frank had been touched by her curiosity. It wasn't easy to admit to your child that you didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, Frank realized that his vulnerability was exactly what Emily needed to hear. So, instead of offering quick fixes or business advice, he shared his journey of self-discovery. He talked about slowing down, about making time for things that really mattered, and most importantly, about being present. It's not about working harder, Frank had told her, it's about working smarter. It's about aligning your efforts with your values, and not letting the world dictate what you should be doing. And it's okay to take breaks. To breathe. To just be. Emily had listened carefully, absorbing his words. And, in the weeks since, Frank had seen a shift in her as well. She had started delegating more at work, carving out time to exercise, and most importantly, reconnecting with her own passions, things she had put on the back burner for years. Frank was proud of his children, but he was also deeply grateful for the ripple effect their transformations had created. What had started with his own journey had now become a shared experience, one that had brought them closer together and made them more resilient in the face of life's challenges. As the days passed, Frank found that his relationships with his children were becoming deeper and more meaningful. They weren't just talking about what was happening in their professional lives, they were talking about what mattered most to them. They were sharing their struggles, their victories, and their hopes for the future. They were learning to slow down together, to savor the small moments that made life so rich. That evening, as Frank prepared another dinner of salmon, roasted vegetables, and a side of blueberries, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. He wasn't just nourishing his body, he was nourishing his soul. And the best part? He wasn't doing it alone. His family was with him on this journey, and together, they were building something far more valuable than success. They were building a life that was meaningful, connected, and fulfilling. Dinner that evening was filled with laughter and conversation, as it had been so many times before. But this time, it felt different. There was a new depth to the conversations, a new sense of shared understanding. Frank looked around the table at his children and felt his heart swell with pride. This was what mattered. Not the accolades, not the achievements, but the moments spent with those you loved, nourishing not just your body, but your spirit. As they finished their meal, Rachel raised her glass. To family, she said with a smile. And to the journey. To the journey, Frank echoed, raising his glass in return. He knew that this was just the beginning. The ripple effect would continue, growing ever wider as they moved forward, embracing each new chapter with open hearts and minds. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold, Frank sat on his porch, a deep sense of contentment enveloping him. It had been a year since he had begun his transformation, since the days of feeling overwhelmed by the rush of life had started to fade, replaced by a new sense of peace and purpose. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. Frank had come to understand something fundamental: life wasn't about seeking perfection, it was about embracing the imperfect moments and finding meaning in them. He had found his rhythm, no longer chasing success in the traditional sense, but instead pursuing a life of balance and fulfillment. And in doing so, he had unlocked something far more valuable than accolades or wealth: inner peace. That evening, as he looked out at the stars beginning to twinkle in the sky, Frank realized that the changes he had made were not just about food or exercise. They had been about a shift in mindset. About learning to prioritize what truly mattered, letting go of what didn't, and allowing life to unfold naturally. The journey had started with something as simple as changing his diet, embracing the power of certain foods like blueberries, almonds, and salmon that nourished his body. But, in truth, the transformation had gone much deeper. It had taught him that the key to staying fit, both physically and mentally, was not about following rigid rules or striving for external validation. It was about listening to his body, finding joy in the present moment, and being intentional with his choices. Frank had learned the power of slowing down. He had once been caught in the never-ending whirlwind of work and achievement, believing that happiness lay just around the corner if he could push through one more deadline, one more challenge. But now, he understood that the secret to fulfillment wasn't about getting ahead, it was about being present. Whether it was enjoying a cup of coffee in the morning or spending quality time with his children, Frank had learned that true contentment came from these simple, everyday moments. And as he looked back over the past year, he realized that the ripple effect of his transformation had reached far beyond just him. Rachel, Emily, and even his extended family had started to see the value in slowing down, in finding balance, and in prioritizing what truly mattered. It wasn't just about being fit, it was about living a life that felt aligned with their values. And that, Frank knew, was a life well lived. Rachel, who had once been a slave to her work, had found new purpose outside of her career. She had learned to take time for herself, to rest, and to cultivate deeper relationships. It had been a journey of self-discovery, and Frank had watched with pride as his daughter had embraced her new path. She no longer defined herself by her job or her success but by the connections she made and the joy she found in the little things. Emily, too, had embraced the changes Frank had suggested, even if at first, it had been difficult. The tech world was fast-paced, and her natural inclination had been to push harder, to do more. But Emily had slowly started to adopt the same principles that had helped her father, taking time to focus on what mattered most, letting go of unnecessary stress, and recognizing the power of consistency over chaos. And now, as Frank sat on his porch with his family gathered around, the final piece of the puzzle seemed to fall into place. The years had passed, and yet, Frank felt more connected to his loved ones than ever before. They had all grown, not just in their individual pursuits, but as a family. They had shared their struggles, their triumphs, and their journeys toward a more balanced life. Together, they had created a new way of living. One that prioritized health, connection, and joy over the pursuit of external success. As the evening wore on, Frank found himself reflecting on the conversations he had shared with his children over the past year. They had talked about everything, from career goals to personal dreams, from regrets to hopes for the future. The bond they shared had deepened in ways he never could have imagined. They were no longer just father and children, they were friends, partners in the journey of life. Rachel leaned back in her chair, glancing at her father with a smile. "Dad, you know what I've realized," she said softly. "I've been so focused on achieving things, on being successful, that I missed out on the best part of life, the journey itself. All the little moments that make up who we are. I think that's what you've been teaching me all along." Frank smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "It's not always easy to see, Rachel. But you've got it now. Life isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, about embracing who you are and where you are, right in this moment." Emily, who had been quietly listening, nodded. "I think that's why I've been feeling more at peace lately. It's not that things are perfect, but I'm learning to focus on what truly matters. I don't need to chase after everything. I just need to be who I am, right now." Frank chuckled softly, his eyes misting with emotion. "I'm so proud of you both. You've both come so far, and you're both learning what it really means to live a full life. It's a lesson I'm still learning, too." They sat there together, the quiet hum of the evening settling in around them. The world felt peaceful, still, a contrast to the chaos Frank had once known. As he looked around at his family, Frank realized that this was the true meaning of success, not in what you accomplished, but in the relationships you nurtured, the moments you savored, and the life you lived in the present. And so, as the stars twinkled above and the night air grew cooler, Frank felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been beautiful, and it had been worth every step. In that moment, Frank understood that the greatest gift he could give to himself and his family was the gift of presence. The future would take care of itself, but for now, they had each other, and that was more than enough. The following weeks brought a sense of calm to Frank that he had never known. As the months passed, it became clear that the changes he had made in his life were not just passing phases, they were becoming permanent shifts in the way he lived, the way he viewed the world, and the way he related to the people he loved. His focus on balance, well-being, and connection was taking root in ways that he hadn't imagined. It was early morning when Frank first got the idea. He was in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of salmon and avocado, two of the foods that had helped him transform his health over the past year. As he spread some almond butter on a piece of whole grain toast, he thought about all the people he had come to know throughout his life who were still struggling. They were stuck in the same hustle, in the same endless race for success, without ever stopping to think about what truly mattered. But Frank knew that it wasn't just the food that had made the difference in his life, it was a mindset shift. It was the decision to prioritize health over hustle, family over fame, and living in the present moment over chasing after distant goals. If people could learn just a fraction of what he had learned over the past year, their lives would be better. They could have more energy, more peace, and a stronger connection to those they loved. They could finally free themselves from the invisible chains that kept them stuck in cycles of burnout and stress. That morning, after his breakfast, Frank had a conversation with Rachel that set everything in motion. "Rachel, I've been thinking," Frank began, leaning back in his chair as he sipped his coffee. "You know how we've been talking about the changes I've made in my life and how it's affected all of us. What if we could share that with others? What if we could help people, especially older adults, learn how to embrace a more balanced life?" Rachel raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "What do you mean? You're thinking about starting something? Like a program or a community?" Frank nodded, his face lighting up with the excitement of the idea. "Exactly. What if we could show people how small changes, like the foods I've been eating, the way I've shifted my focus, could transform their lives too? It's not just about fitness. It's about a lifestyle. A way of thinking. And it could help so many others who feel lost in the chaos." Rachel paused for a moment, contemplating. She knew how much this journey had meant to her father, and she could see the potential in what he was suggesting. "You know, Dad, I think it could be great. We could create something that combines practical advice with emotional support, teach people how to take back control over their lives, one step at a time." That was the spark Frank had been waiting for. Over the next few days, they brainstormed ideas and put together a plan. They envisioned a community where older adults could come together to share their stories, learn from each other, and make small but impactful changes to their daily routines. They would focus on food, mindset, exercise, and emotional well-being, everything that had contributed to Frank's own transformation. In the weeks that followed, Rachel and Frank worked tirelessly to build their vision. They launched a website, started a blog, and began recording videos where they discussed the importance of small changes. They focused on the 3 key foods that had played a central role in Frank's journey: blueberries, almonds, and salmon, and emphasized how they could fuel the body and support long-term health. But the key message was always the same: it wasn't about perfection, it was about progress. Emily, too, had come on board. As a tech-savvy entrepreneur, she helped them design the website, create content, and ensure that their platform was user-friendly. She also helped them develop a strong social media presence, reaching out to people in their target demographic and engaging with them in meaningful ways. Emily had witnessed firsthand the way her father's life had changed, and now she was eager to share that with others. And so, the project, named New Beginnings, was born. At first, the response was slow. People were hesitant, unsure if a new approach to health could really make a difference in their lives. But over time, the community began to grow. They hosted virtual workshops on food, fitness, and emotional health, offering practical advice and support. The community members shared their stories, their struggles, and their successes. Frank, Rachel, and Emily worked tirelessly to offer encouragement, guidance, and the tools people needed to make lasting changes. The turning point came one sunny afternoon when Frank received an email that stopped him in his tracks. It was from a woman named Carol, an older adult who had been following their platform for several months. She wrote about her own struggles with weight, stress, and low energy. She shared how she had tried countless diets and exercise plans, only to feel defeated when they didn't work. But then she had come across their videos, their stories, and their message. Slowly, she had begun to make small changes. She had started adding more whole foods to her diet, prioritizing sleep, and finding time to take walks outside. Dear Frank and Rachel, the email began. I don't know if you'll read this, but I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to start. Thank you for making me believe in myself again. I've lost 15 pounds, my energy is higher than it's been in years, and I'm learning how to slow down and enjoy life again. I'm finally feeling like myself, and I have you to thank for that. Frank sat there, staring at the email, a tear slipping down his cheek. It was moments like these that made the whole journey worth it. It wasn't about the number of followers or the number of likes. It was about changing one life at a time, offering hope to those who felt stuck, and helping people reclaim the joy that life had to offer. As Frank read the email aloud to Rachel and Emily, they both smiled, their hearts full. This is why we're doing this, Rachel said softly. It's about giving people the tools they need to change their lives. It's not about making them into someone they're not, it's about helping them become the best version of themselves. And so, as the months passed, the New Beginnings community continued to grow. Frank's story, his lessons, and his message of balance and well-being touched more and more lives. It wasn't the end of his journey. In fact, Frank knew that the journey would never truly end. Life was about constant growth, constant change, and constant new beginnings. But for now, Frank was content. He had found his purpose again, not in the things he could accumulate, but in the lives he could touch and the legacy he could create. It was a crisp autumn morning when Frank sat at his desk, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. His phone buzzed with a new message, a notification from their New Beginnings platform. As he opened it, his heart warmed when he saw the words, "Success Story Shared." The email was from Anne, a 67-year-old woman who had been following their platform for nearly 6 months. She wrote about her struggles with arthritis and depression, her lack of energy, and how she felt disconnected from the world around her. Dear Frank and Rachel, Anne's email began. I can't thank you enough for everything you've shared. When I first started, I thought it was just another one of those programs that wouldn't work for me. But your message, your approach, it felt different. I started incorporating small changes into my routine, starting with the foods you recommended, and slowly, things began to shift. My energy increased. My arthritis pain became more manageable. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not just surviving, I'm living. Tears welled up in Frank's eyes as he finished reading. This was it, the reason why they had started New Beginnings in the first place. The impact they were having on people's lives was beyond what he had imagined. It wasn't just about helping people get healthier, it was about giving them their lives back, giving them the tools to reclaim their sense of purpose and joy. When he shared the email with Rachel and Emily, both of them felt a wave of pride. Emily, always the practical one, looked at her father. Dad, you've really made a difference in people's lives. It's more than just a business or a project now, it's a movement. You've created something that's helping people transform, both physically and emotionally. Rachel nodded in agreement. I think we're just getting started. The more people we reach, the more success stories we'll hear. People want change, but they also need support. And that's exactly what we're offering, a community. Frank smiled, feeling the weight of their words. Over the last few months, he had watched not only his own life transform but also the lives of the people around him. The platform had grown exponentially, and the feedback they received was overwhelmingly positive. But it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the connections they had built, the friendships that had formed, and the powerful sense of belonging that their community provided. But as the platform continued to grow, so did the challenges. Frank knew that they couldn't keep up with the growing demand by themselves. As much as they tried, there were only so many hours in the day. And he had always prided himself on ensuring that everything they did was of the highest quality. But as they discussed the possibilities of expanding their efforts, it became clear that they would need help. One evening, as Frank and Rachel brainstormed ideas over a cup of coffee, Rachel said something that changed the direction of their conversation. "Dad, what if we brought in experts? People who could contribute knowledge in areas where we might not be as strong. We could bring in nutritionists, mental health coaches, fitness experts. That way, we can offer a more comprehensive approach to our community." Frank paused, considering the idea. He had always believed in the power of community, but he realized that they could do so much more if they partnered with professionals who had the expertise to elevate the platform even further. "I think that's a great idea, Rachel. We've built something amazing already, but to really make an impact, we need a broader team." The next few weeks were filled with interviews and meetings with nutritionists, physical therapists, and mental health professionals. Frank and Rachel wanted to ensure they partnered with people who shared the same values, people who were genuinely passionate about helping others live better lives. By the time they had assembled their team, the platform had evolved into something far more expansive than Frank could have ever imagined. Now, New Beginnings was not just a wellness platform, it was a holistic, all-encompassing resource for older adults. It combined nutritional advice, physical fitness routines tailored to seniors, mental health support, and a community forum where people could connect, share their journeys, and offer encouragement to one another. The new team members brought a wealth of knowledge, and they worked tirelessly to create well-researched content that spoke directly to the needs of their audience. There were live Q&A sessions, expert-led webinars, and in-depth articles that covered everything from joint health to mindfulness techniques. One of the most popular new features was a virtual fitness class tailored specifically for seniors, hosted by a certified trainer named Mark. Mark had worked with older adults for over 20 years, and his gentle, encouraging approach resonated deeply with the community. Soon, hundreds of seniors were participating in the weekly classes, sharing their progress, and feeling stronger both mentally and physically. As Frank watched the platform grow, he felt a profound sense of pride, not just in the success of the business, but in the ripple effect they were creating. They weren't just changing individual lives, they were building a movement that was shifting the way people thought about aging. They were proving that it wasn't about slowing down or giving up as you got older. It was about embracing the process of growing older with strength, grace, and purpose. One afternoon, as Frank sat on the porch, looking out at the horizon, he received another message. This time it was from his old friend Tom, someone Frank had known for years but had lost touch with over time. The message was short but impactful. "Frank, I don't know if you remember me, but I've been following your New Beginnings project for a while. I've been feeling stuck for years, physically, mentally, emotionally, but after watching your videos and reading your blog, I decided to make a change. I'm starting slow, just like you suggested, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I wanted to thank you. You've inspired me more than you'll ever know." Frank set the phone down, overwhelmed with emotion. He had always wanted to make a difference, but he never imagined the ripple effect his actions would have. Tom's message was a reminder that the work they were doing was more than just about health, it was about giving people hope, helping them reclaim their lives, and inspiring them to live their fullest. And as Frank sat there, surrounded by the beauty of the world and the love of his family, he knew that the journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The ripple effect they had started would continue to grow, reaching people far and wide, helping them find their own path to health, happiness, and fulfillment. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?